Ma'am, you now legally owe me $350 in back rent for living in my garage. That's what I told the HOA Karen who'd been terrorizing our neighborhood for 8 years. The look on her face was priceless. She went from smug and self-satisfied to utterly speechless in about 2 seconds flat. This woman had believed she could park her BMW in my garage whenever she pleased, hand out bogus fines like Halloween candy, and treat me like her personal doormat. What she didn't realize was that her entitled behavior had accidentally made her my tenant under state law. So, what's the pettiest thing an HOA has ever done to you? Drop your stories in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. By day 5, she was begging to pay rent just to get her car back. Let me show you exactly how Karen's own arrogance became her downfall. My name's Jake, and 3 months ago, I was just a 34-year-old IT contractor trying to start over after a messy divorce. My grandmother had left me her little house in Pine Ridge, a modest 1960s ranch with white shutters and a detached single-car garage that smelled of old motor oil and forgotten dreams. The scent hit me every time I lifted that garage door, a blend of WD-40, dusty Christmas decorations, and the faint echo of my grandfather's long-ago woodworking projects. I'd moved there to heal, financially stretched, emotionally drained, just wanting peace and quiet to rebuild my life. The house was perfect, except for one thing. The HOA, enter Karen Whitmore, 52 years old, 8 years as HOA board treasurer, and the kind of woman who wielded a clipboard like a weapon of mass destruction. She drove a spotless white BMW X5, lived in the biggest house on the block, and had a perfectly sculpted bob that didn't move even in hurricane-force winds. I swear, that hair had its own engineering degree, but here's what made Karen dangerous. She didn't just enforce HOA rules, she weaponized them. And she had a pattern. Ask anyone in Pine Ridge who'd been caught in her crosshairs. And you'd notice a theme. Single parents, retirees on fixed incomes, the young Hispanic family whose kids played too. Loudly, anyone who didn't fit Karen's narrow vision of suburban perfection got the treatment. My first real encounter with her happened just 3 days after I moved in. I was working from home trying to debug a client's network issue when I heard the distinctive purr of her BMW rolling up my driveway. No big deal, I thought. Maybe she was being friendly, bringing a welcome basket or something. Instead, I walked outside to find her BMW parked inside my garage. Not near it, not beside it. Inside. There she stood. Designer jeans, crisp white blouse, clutching that cursed clipboard, staring at me like I was the one trespassing. "Excuse me," I said, trying to stay polite. I was new and didn't want neighborhood drama. "That's my garage." She looked up from her clipboard, her perfume hitting me from 10 feet away. An overwhelming floral cloud that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. "Emergency HOA meeting," she said flatly, as if that explained everything. "Your driveway was closest." The audacity was breathtaking. "I need to get my tools out for a client job," I said evenly. "Could you please move your car?" Karen's heels clicked on the concrete as she brushed past me, ignoring the question completely. "I'll move it when I'm good and ready," she said over her shoulder. "Maybe you should learn to be more community-minded." And just like that, she was gone, leaving her BMW sitting in my garage like she owned the place. 6 hours. 6 long hours her car stayed there, blocking my access to my camping gear, my toolbox, everything. I had to reschedule a client appointment because I couldn't get to my equipment. When Karen finally came back, she didn't apologize or even acknowledge it. She acted like she was doing me a favor by removing her car. That night, I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, staring at her old photo on the windowsill, feeling like I was already failing her memory. She'd been tough, the kind of woman who once fought city council to get streetlights installed on our block back in the 80s. What? Would she think of her grandson getting pushed around by some HOA queen with a superiority complex? The crunch of gravel under Karen's tires as she finally left echoed in my head, mixed with the lingering sweetness of her perfume in the garage. That combination told me everything I needed to know about my new neighbor. This wasn't over. Karen had declared war, and she had no idea she'd picked the wrong target. The next morning, I woke up to 3 bright yellow violation notices taped to my front door like suburban scarlet letters. My coffee was still brewing as I peeled them off, the morning dew making the ink slightly smudged, but not enough to hide what she'd done. Violation 1, unapproved mailbox color. Apparently, my grandmother's black mailbox broke some obscure rule about earth tone coordination with the neighborhood's aesthetic standards. Fine, $50 violation. 2. Excessive window coverings. My bedroom blinds supposedly violated community visibility requirements. Another $50 violation. 3. Improper trash bin placement. My garbage can was allegedly 4 inches too close to the street. You guessed it, $50 more. Each notice came with a crisp 10-day correction deadline and a handwritten note in Karen's perfect cursive, "Welcome to the neighborhood. We maintain standards here." That little smiley face made my blood pressure spike. Here's the thing about revenge. It's best served with a side of documentation. So instead of storming over to her house like she probably expected, I opened my laptop and started digging. The mechanical clack of my keyboard at 7 in the morning probably annoyed the neighbors, but I didn't care. I was on a mission. First discovery. Karen had filed all 3 violations on the same day as the garage incident. Totally not suspicious, right? Second discovery. According to the HOA management portal, board members needed a majority vote before issuing citations. Karen's violations? Filed unilaterally. No board approval. That's when things got interesting. I called the HOA management company directly. After 20 minutes of elevator jazz hold music from someone's fever dream, a tired-sounding woman named Beth finally answered. "Hi," I said. "I'm calling about some violation notices I received. I wanted to confirm the filing procedures." "Oh, sure, honey," she replied. "What's your address?" I gave it to her. A pause, then typing sounds. "Huh, that's interesting," Beth said slowly. I could practically hear her frown through the phone. "These violations were filed by Karen Whitmore, but there's no record of board approval." Actually, looking at her history, this seems to be a pattern. My coffee went cold as Beth explained that Karen had been issuing unauthorized violations for months, maybe years. The management company had been processing them automatically, assuming board approval existed. But after some resident complaints, they'd started auditing the files and discovered Karen had basically been running her own personal citation empire. "So these violations aren't even valid?" I asked. "Technically, no," he replied. "And if you want my unofficial advice, demand a receipt for every HOA fine you pay. A lot of board members pocket that money instead of putting it back into community funds." Knowledge nugget number 1. Folks, always insist on itemized receipts for HOA fines and verify board approval through the management company. Unauthorized citations happen far more often than you'd think. But Karen wasn't done with me. Oh no. That was just the opening act. That afternoon, I was drafting a polite but firm email to the HOA board demanding dismissal of Karen's bogus violations when I heard the familiar purr of a BMW in my driveway. I peeked out the window. There she was again, pulling straight into my garage like she owned the place. This time, she didn't even bother pretending there was an emergency. She simply parked, got out, and left another handwritten note under my windshield wiper. "Complaints will be noted in your permanent file. Community cooperation is expected." The audacity was almost impressive. Here I was, documenting her actual legal violations, and she responded by trespassing on my property again, while threatening me with some imaginary permanent file like we were back in elementary school. But this time, Karen made a crucial mistake. I had installed a security camera system the day after moving in. Nothing fancy, just some basic wireless cameras I bought online. The footage of her first garage invasion had been useful for my records, but this second incident, this was pure gold. Now I had documented proof of trespassing, evidence of retaliatory harassment, and a clear pattern of Karen treating my private garage like her personal parking spot. Even better, I had timestamps showing she was using my garage without permission, while simultaneously filing bogus violations against me. That night, I sat in my grandmother's old recliner reviewing footage and documentation. The leather was worn smooth from decades of use and still faintly smelled of her lavender soap. I could almost hear her voice. "Jake, honey, bullies only understand one language: strength." The coffee ring stains on my laptop screen from late-night research couldn't hide the truth staring back at me. Karen thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. Little did she know, I was about to change the entire game. 2 days later, Karen called in reinforcements. And by reinforcements, I mean her little circle of HOA cronies, 3 other wives who apparently had nothing better to do than terrorize their neighbors for sport. First came Linda, Karen's lieutenant, driving a silver Lexus and carrying what looked like an official inspection checklist. She spent 20 minutes circling my property, taking photos of my lawn with the dedication of a crime scene investigator. According to some obscure subsection of the covenant I'd never heard of, my grass was irregularly maintained. Then came Patricia, clipboard in hand, measuring the exact height of my outdoor solar lights with an actual ruler. Turns out they were half an inch too tall and cast non-compliant shadows on the sidewalk. I watched this performance from my kitchen window, eating a sandwich, wondering if these women had ever considered getting actual hobbies. The grand finale was Susan, who spent 15 minutes photographing my mailbox from every conceivable angle like she was documenting evidence for the International Criminal Court. Apparently, a small dent left by the previous owner's car constituted neighborhood aesthetic degradation. By noon, I had 3 new violation notices, $50 each, of course, with Karen's personal signature on every single one, plus another passive-aggressive note. Community standards benefit everyone. Compliance ensures property values. But here's where Karen's strategy spectacularly backfired. While her Mean Girls Club was busy playing property inspector, I was building my own network. And it turned out I wasn't the only one targeted by the Pine Ridge Enforcement Squad. Mrs. Chen, my 78-year-old neighbor, knocked on my door that afternoon carrying a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Her hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from anger. "You want to know about Karen?" she said, settling into my grandmother's old kitchen chair. "Let me show you what she did to us." Inside the folder were 2 years of violation notices, $50 fines for everything from excessive garden gnome displays to unauthorized bird feeding stations. Mrs. Chen and her husband had paid over $3,000 in bogus fines before. Their son intervened and threatened legal action, and she wasn't alone. She introduced me to the Rodriguez family, fined repeatedly for their kids' toys being visible in their own backyard, and to Bill Henderson, a veteran in his 60s who'd racked up hundreds in fines because Karen decided his service dog's water bowl was an unapproved outdoor fixture. The pattern was crystal clear. Karen targeted anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection: elderly folks, families with young kids, anyone who looked different or had less money to fight back. She was running a systematic harassment campaign disguised as HOA enforcement. That evening, I stumbled upon something that changed everything while researching property law for my own situation. Because, let's be honest, I was getting desperate. I came across something called adverse possession statutes. More importantly, I found references to involuntary tenancy and landlord abandonment laws. The legal concept was simple. If someone repeatedly uses your property with your knowledge and you don't take immediate action to remove them, the law can treat them as a tenant with actual rights. Even stranger, if that tenant leaves personal property on your premises, specific landlord-tenant laws kick in. I spent the next 3 hours diving down a legal rabbit hole that would make any law student proud. My laptop screen glowed in the dark kitchen while I clicked through statute after statute, cross-referencing case law and precedent. The smell of reheated pizza mixed with the faint scent of my grandmother's lavender dish soap still lingering in the sink. Then it hit me like a lightning bolt. Karen had been using my garage repeatedly. She'd stored HOA supplies and personal items there. I had security footage documenting her access and use. Under state law, her repeated use of my property, combined with storage of personal belongings, could legally establish a landlord-tenant relationship, which meant Karen Whitmore, HOA board treasurer and neighborhood tyrant had accidentally become my tenant, and she didn't even know it. The irony was delicious. Here she was, trying to control my property with bogus violations, while simultaneously creating a legal situation where I could control her through actual tenancy law. I leaned back in my grandmother's chair, listening to the old house settle around me, and smiled for the first time in weeks. Karen thought she was playing chess while I fumbled with checkers. She had no idea I was about to flip the entire board. Karen's next move was nuclear. 3 days after her inspection squad's reign of terror, a knock on my door made my blood run cold. Standing on my porch was a city building inspector, clipboard, hard hat, and an expression that told me my day was about to get much worse. "Mr. Thompson, I'm here regarding a complaint about an unpermitted structure and possible zoning violations." My heart sank. "I'm sorry, what?" I managed to ask. The inspector, a middle-aged man named Rodriguez, glanced down at the papers in his hand. "We received a report alleging you're operating an illegal business out of your garage, violating residential zoning laws. There are also claims of structural modifications done without permits." I stood there in my coffee-stained t-shirt, trying to process what he was saying. The crisp morning air smelled like autumn leaves and impending disaster. "Business." "What business?" I asked, bewildered. "IT consulting," Rodriguez replied. "According to the complainant, you've made unauthorized modifications, including extra electrical wiring and ventilation systems." The pieces snapped together like a puzzle made of pure spite. Karen had called the city, fabricated a story about me running a business from my garage, and was now trying to have my property flagged. She'd gone from petty HOA harassment to potentially making my home unlivable. But here's the thing about IT people. We document everything. "Can I ask who filed the complaint?" I said, though I already knew. Rodriguez flipped through his folder. "A Karen Whitmore HOA board member. She submitted a detailed report with photos and timestamps." Of course she had. I spent the next hour walking Rodriguez through my property records. My garage, as it turned out, had been built in 1962, fully permitted and recorded in the city archives. I even pulled up the original construction permits on the city's website as he watched, his skeptical expression slowly shifting to one of professional irritation. "These records confirm the garage was built legally," he said, comparing my screen to his notes. "And I don't see any signs of commercial activity." Then I showed him something that made his jaw tighten. Karen's complaint wasn't just wrong, it was deliberately falsified. She'd claimed I'd added new electrical outlets for industrial equipment, when in fact those outlets were part of the original 1962 construction. She'd also reported commercial-grade ventilation systems that were actually nothing more than the old garage door opener my grandfather installed back in the 80s. "Mr. Thompson," Rodriguez said, snapping his folder shut with a decisive clap that echoed through the garage, "filing false reports with the city is a serious matter. This one contains multiple intentional inaccuracies." But Karen wasn't finished. While Rodriguez wrapped up his inspection, I heard the familiar hum of a white BMW pulling into my driveway. Karen herself, likely expecting to watch my garage get condemned, stepped out, clipboard in hand. Instead, she walked straight into the scene of her own exposure. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rodriguez called out as she approached, "I need to ask you about the report you submitted." The color drained from her face faster than water down a drain. "Oh, well, I was only concerned about community safety and property values," she stammered. "Your report mentions unauthorized electrical work," Rodriguez said evenly. "But city records show all wiring dates to the original construction. You also described commercial ventilation systems that don't exist. How do you explain these discrepancies?" Karen started babbling about just trying to help and maintaining community standards, but Rodriguez wasn't buying a word of it. He informed her that filing false reports wastes city resources and can lead to fines or penalties. Watching her squirm under official scrutiny was like watching a vampire meet sunlight. Every ounce of her confidence melted away the moment she faced someone who actually held authority. But that confrontation gave me more than satisfaction. It handed me the missing Piece of my legal puzzle. That night, I called my friend Rick, a lawyer who owed me a favor from when I'd rescued his office network during a ransomware attack. I explained Karen's escalating harassment, her repeated unauthorized use of my garage, and her attempts to damage my property. "Jake," Rick said after listening, "what you're describing might actually qualify as an involuntary landlord-tenant relationship." I blinked. "How does that work?" "She's been using your garage repeatedly, storing her stuff there, treating it like her own. If you can document consistent use over time, there's legal precedent for involuntary tenancy." My pulse quickened. "And what does that mean exactly?" "It means," Rick continued, "she could legally be your tenant. You can demand back rent, set formal lease terms, or even start eviction proceedings. Document everything. This could get interesting." I hung up and looked around my grandmother's old kitchen, feeling her fierce spirit running through me. The faint scent of her lavender soap lingered in the air, mingling with the smell of cold pizza left on the counter. Karen thought she could destroy me with lies and intimidation, but she'd just handed me the keys to her own downfall. The next morning, I sat in Rick's cramped law office, which smelled like old leather and fresh coffee, watching him sift through my security footage and paperwork. His desk was a chaotic mix of law books and empty energy drink cans. "Jake, this is incredible," he said, pushing his glasses up. "Karen's repeated use of your garage absolutely meets the criteria for involuntary tenancy under state law." He flipped open a thick legal manual and pointed to a section. "Here, when an individual repeatedly uses private property with the owner's knowledge, stores personal belongings there, and establishes a pattern of regular access, the law can recognize an implied landlord-tenant relationship." My coffee cup froze halfway to my lips. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying," Rick replied, grinning like a shark, "that Karen Whitmore has been your unauthorized tenant for 6 weeks, and she doesn't even know it. Better yet, she's been storing HOA supplies in your garage. Under landlord-tenant law, if she abandons them without paying rent, that's legally considered abandoned property. The implications hit me like a freight train." "So what happens now?" Rick started counting on his fingers. "First, you can demand back rent. Market rate for garage storage runs about $150 a month. 6 weeks comes to roughly $225 in back rent. Add late fees, inconvenience charges, and utilities, you're looking at about $350 total. And here's the best part. As her landlord, you have the legal right to secure the property if rent isn't paid." My head spun. "Secure the property?" "Exactly," he said. "You can legally lock the garage with her belongings inside until she pays. It's called a landlord's lien. And if she doesn't pay within the notice period, you can legally dispose of the abandoned property." The irony was perfect. Karen had been using my garage like she owned it, treating me as if I were some powerless victim. Instead, her entitled behavior had accidentally made her my tenant, with real legal obligations. But here's the most beautiful part. Rick said, "Look at your security footage timestamps. Karen's been accessing your garage using her own key." I blinked. "Her own key?" She had to get that key from somewhere. Either she made an unauthorized copy or someone gave her access. Either way, it proved she'd been treating my garage like her personal storage unit. Rick pulled out a legal form and started writing. "We're going to serve her with a formal notice of tenancy and rent demand, certified mail, completely by the book. She'll have 7 days to respond after receiving notice." The smell of his coffee mingled with the musty scent of old law books as Rick explained the timeline. She can either pay the back rent and establish a formal lease, dispute the tenancy claim in court, or face eviction proceedings. And if she ignores it, we file for eviction, and her BMW becomes collateral for unpaid rent. Rick's grin widened. "Jake, she walked right into the most perfect legal trap I've ever seen." I sat there in stunned silence, realizing I'd been playing chess while thinking it was checkers. Karen's harassment, her garage use, her storage of items, it had all built toward this moment where her behavior gave me legal power over her. Knowledge, nugget number 2. Property law is complex, but repeated use of someone's space, especially for storing personal items, can create involuntary tenancy relationships that give landlords significant legal rights. Rick handed me the completed notice. Welcome to being Karen's landlord, Jake. Something tells me she's not going to take this well. Over the next 3 days, I assembled what I like to call my Justice League, a ragtag team of neighbors who'd been waiting years for someone to finally stand up to Karen's reign of terror. First recruit, Mrs. Chen. She showed up at my door with a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet and eyes that sparkled with the kind of vengeance only a 78-year-old grandmother can properly execute. "Jake, honey," she said, settling into my kitchen, "I've been keeping records for 2 years. Karen targeted my rose garden, my bird feeders, even my grandson's bicycle. Time to use this." Mrs. Chen's documentation was incredible. Photos, timestamps, copies of every bogus violation notice. She'd even recorded some of Karen's aggressive confrontations on her phone. The woman was basically a one-person surveillance operation disguised as a sweet elderly neighbor. Next came the Rodriguez family, Maria and Carlos, along with their 8-year-old twins, who'd been fined repeatedly for the audacity of owning toys. Carlos worked in construction and understood property law better than most lawyers. "Man, what you're doing is genius," Carlos said, reviewing Rick's legal strategy. "Karen's been acting like she owns everyone's property. Time she learned about actual ownership rights." Maria pulled out her own folder. "She fined us $200 last month because Elena's chalk art was defacing the community sidewalks." It was hopscotch squares. Then there was Bill Henderson, the 63-year-old veteran whose service dog had been declared an unapproved outdoor fixture under Karen's twisted interpretation of HOA rules. Bill brought experience dealing with bureaucratic nonsense and an unshakable calm. "Son," Bill said, examining Rick's legal paperwork, "this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You're using her own weapons against her." My secret weapon, though, was Rick's legal expertise. He spent hours walking us through landlord-tenant law, explaining our rights and Karen's obligations in plain language. "Here's the beautiful thing about involuntary tenancy," Rick explained to our group gathered in my living room. "It's not some obscure loophole. It's established law designed to protect property owners from exactly this kind of situation." He pulled out a whiteboard and started drawing diagrams. Step 1. Serve the notice of tenancy via certified mail. Step 2. Wait for Karen's response. Step 3. Document everything she does afterward. The technical preparation was where my IT background really shined. I upgraded my security camera system, installed audio recording capabilities, and set up automatic cloud backups. Every interaction with Karen would be documented in high definition with crystal clear audio. Knowledge nugget number 3. When dealing with property disputes, comprehensive documentation trumps everything. Courts love timestamps, video evidence, and certified mail delivery confirmations. Mrs. Chen suggested we coordinate our response. If Karen retaliates against Jake, she'll probably escalate her harassment of all of us. We need to be ready, so we created a neighborhood communication network, group texts, shared photo folders, coordinated documentation. If Karen targeted any of us, the others would immediately start recording. Carlos came up with a brilliant idea: researching fair market rental rates. If this goes to court, you'll want rock-solid numbers. I know 3 storage facilities we can get quotes from. We discovered that garage storage space in our area rented for between $140 and $160 per month. Karen's 6 weeks of usage, plus late fees and utility costs, easily justified the $350 demand Rick had calculated. Bill suggested we research Karen's own property for potential violations. "Know your enemy," he said with military precision. "If she wants to play by HOA rules, let's make sure she's following them herself." That investigation was enlightening. Karen's property had at least 4 violations she'd conveniently never cited herself for: an unapproved garden shed, outdoor lighting that exceeded height restrictions, and a mailbox that didn't match the approved color palette. The psychological preparation was just as important. Rick coached me on staying calm during confrontations, documenting everything and never losing my temper. No matter how outrageous Karen's behavior became, "She's going to escalate when she gets this notice," Rick warned. Expect the absolute worst behavior you've ever seen from her. But that's actually good. The more unhinged she gets, the stronger your case becomes. Mrs. Chen patted my hand with the confidence of someone who'd raised 6 children. Honey, bullies like Karen have been getting away with their behavior for so long, they've forgotten that actions have consequences. Time to remind her. As we wrapped up our planning session, I looked around my grandmother's living room at this unlikely alliance. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air and the determined expressions on everyone's faces. Karen had spent years dividing and conquering this neighborhood through fear and intimidation. She was about to learn what happens when her victims finally unite and fight back with actual legal weapons. The certified mail notice was delivered on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. I know this because Karen's reaction was so spectacular that 3 different neighbors texted me the exact timestamp of when she started. Screaming in her driveway. The notice itself was beautiful in its simplicity, official letterhead, precise legal language, and a crystal-clear message, notice of landlord-tenant relationship and demand for rent. Rick had crafted it perfectly, explaining that Karen owed me $350 for her unauthorized use of my garage. Her first response arrived exactly 43 minutes after delivery. I was working when I heard her BMW screech into my driveway with the fury of a woman whose worldview had just shattered. The pounding on my front door sounded like someone trying to break it down. I calmly activated my security cameras, ensured my phone was recording, and opened the door to find Karen's face contorted into a shade of red I didn't know was humanly possible. "This is harassment," she shrieked, waving the legal notice like it was on fire. "This is frivolous. This is insane." "Good morning, Karen," I said with practiced calm. "I see you received the notice. You have 7 days to respond according to state law. You can't just declare me your tenant. That's not how this works." I pulled out my phone and showed her security footage of her repeated garage use. "Actually, Karen, that's exactly how involuntary tenancy law works. You used my property repeatedly, stored your belongings there, and established a pattern of access." Watching her entitled confidence crumble was like witnessing a controlled demolition. She'd spent so long bullying people who didn't know their rights that she'd never encountered someone who actually understood the law. "It was just emergency parking," she stammered. 23 separate occasions. "Over 6 weeks," I replied, consulting my documentation. "That's not emergency parking, Karen. That's regular use of private property without permission." Her voice rose to a pitch that probably scared neighborhood dogs. "I'll sue you. I'll have you arrested. I'll get you kicked out of this neighborhood." "Feel free to call the police," I said, gesturing to my security cameras. "I'm sure they'd be interested in reviewing footage of your repeated trespassing." That's when Karen made her first critical error. Instead of walking away to consult a lawyer, she decided to escalate. Right there in front of my cameras, with perfect audio, she made threats that would look devastating in court. "You have no idea who you're messing with," she snarled. "I have connections. I'll make your life hell. I'll have city inspectors here every week." I smiled and held up my phone. "All being recorded, Karen, but please continue." The realization hit her like a slap. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw the real Karen, not the confident HOA enforcer, but a petty tyrant who'd never been challenged. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next 3 days, she launched a desperate, scorched earth campaign. She filed complaints with the city about my illegal parking structure. She reported my security cameras as privacy violations. She even called the fire department, claiming my garage was a fire hazard. Each complaint was more ridiculous than the last. The city inspector, who'd already cleared my garage, sent back a form letter basically saying, "Stop wasting our time." The fire department found nothing wrong, except for Karen's own storage violations. But here's where her desperation really showed. She started targeting my allies. Mrs. Chen received 2 new violation notices for excessive garden ornamentation. The Rodriguez family got cited for unauthorized children's equipment in their backyard. Bill Henderson was threatened with fines for his service dog's water bowl. The beautiful thing was, we were ready. Our neighborhood communication network lit up every time Karen made a move. Photos, timestamps, witnesses. We documented everything with precision. Carlos texted me a photo of Karen measuring his kids' playground equipment with a ruler at 6 in the morning. Mrs. Chen sent video of Karen screaming at her rose bushes like they had personally offended her. Bill calmly recorded her arguing with his service dog about municipal water regulations. Karen's biggest mistake, though, was underestimating how fed up the entire neighborhood had become. Word of our legal strategy spread like wildfire. Other residents started coming forward with their own Karen horror stories and documentation. By Thursday, she'd transformed herself from neighborhood enforcer to neighborhood pariah. Her desperate intimidation tactics had backfired spectacularly, leaving behind a paper trail of harassment that would make any lawyer salivate. The smell of autumn leaves filled the air as I watched her support network crumble. Even her usual allies began to distance themselves from her increasingly erratic behavior. She had 5 days left to respond to my notice. And instead of seeking legal advice, she was digging herself deeper with every reckless move. Karen was about to learn that when you declare war on someone who knows the law, you'd better make sure you can win. Then came the next surprise. I blinked slowly, processing the sheer audacity. She'd actually called state housing authorities and filed false reports claiming I was running an illegal rental operation. "I'm sorry," I said, pulling out my phone to start recording, "but this is a single-family residence. I live here alone." Karen's face lit up with smug satisfaction. "Then explain why you've been demanding rent from residents of this community." There it was, her trap. She thought she was being clever, using my legal notice against me. In her twisted logic, if I was demanding rent from her, I must be operating an illegal rental business. The housing inspector looked confused. "Sir, do you rent out portions of your property?" "No," I replied calmly, "but I do have an involuntary tenant who's been using my garage without permission for 6 weeks. Karen's smugness faltered. You can't just—" "Actually," I continued, turning to the inspector, "under state landlord-tenant law, repeated unauthorized use of private property can establish a tenancy relationship." I showed the inspector my documentation, security footage of Karen's repeated garage use, timestamps, photos of her personal items stored there, and the legal notice Rick had prepared. "This woman has been trespassing repeatedly," I explained. "My research revealed that her pattern of use actually made her my involuntary tenant under state law." The inspector studied my documentation with growing interest. "Ma'am," she said, turning to Karen, "did you file a false report about illegal boarding house operations?" Karen's face went through several color changes before settling on a sickly shade of green. "I was just community safety. He's harassing residents." "Ma'am, filing false reports with state agencies is a serious offense," the inspector said firmly. "This appears to be a private property dispute, not a housing code violation." The woman with the camera, probably a private investigator Karen had hired, quietly started backing toward her car. Even she could see this was going sideways fast. But then Karen made her biggest mistake yet. Instead of cutting her losses, she doubled down with a screaming meltdown, spectacular even by her standards. "This is all lies," she shrieked. "He's manipulating you. I'm a respected member of this community." I'd served on the HOA board for 8 years when the inspector instinctively took a step back. Karen's voice had reached glass-shattering levels. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to calm down," he said. "I will not calm down. This man is destroying our neighborhood. He's a troublemaker. He doesn't belong here." And just like that, Karen's mask slipped completely. Her true feelings about who she believed belonged in her neighborhood were laid bare for everyone to hear. The inspector's expression shifted from polite professionalism to unmistakable discomfort. That's when Mrs. Chen appeared, timing her entrance perfectly, balancing a plate of cookies in one hand and a manila folder in the other. "Officer," she said sweetly, "I have 2 years of records documenting this woman's harassment of elderly residents." Behind her came Carlos, clutching his own folder, and then Bill, standing tall beside his service dog with a stack of bogus violation notices. Within minutes, Karen found herself surrounded by neighbors, each one armed with evidence of her systematic abuse. The inspector glanced around at the impromptu mountain of proof, then turned back to Karen, who was still ranting about property values. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "I think you need to leave, now." Karen's hired help made a quick retreat to their cars. But she couldn't resist one final threat that sealed her fate. "You haven't heard the last of this," she shrieked. "I'll have you all evicted. I'll call immigration." The inspector raised her hand sharply. "Ma'am, stop talking. You're only making this worse for yourself." At last, Karen seemed to realize she was standing in a hole she'd dug entirely on her own, surrounded by witnesses and recording devices after publicly threatening residents based on perceived immigration status. The crisp autumn air mingled with the acrid scent of Karen's burning bridges as I watched her storm back to her BMW. She had less than 48 hours left to respond to my legal notice, and instead of hiring a lawyer, she'd just handed me enough evidence to bury her in court. Sunday evening arrived with the finality of a judge's gavel. Karen had exactly 12 hours left to respond, and rather than pay or negotiate, she'd gone nuclear, calling an emergency HOA board meeting to address the crisis threatening our community. The community center was packed like a sold-out concert. Over 40 residents filled every chair, with more standing shoulder to shoulder along the walls. In the back corner, a reporter from the local paper adjusted her camera, ready to capture the showdown everyone had come to see. Karen sat at the head table with the remaining 3 board members, looking like a general preparing for her last stand. Her perfectly styled hair showed the first cracks of stress, and her trademark confident smile had been replaced with the tight-lipped grimace of someone bracing for execution. "This emergency meeting," she began, her voice echoing with forced authority, "has been called to address the disruptive and litigious behavior threatening the very foundation of our community." She gestured toward me dramatically. "Jake Thompson has been harassing board members, filing frivolous legal claims, and attempting to extort money from longtime residents through intimidation tactics." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Karen was trying to play to her loyalists, framing me as the outsider versus the community, but she'd made a fatal miscalculation. She didn't know about our documentation network. I rose slowly, Rick beside me with a briefcase full of evidence. "May I respond to these allegations?" I asked. Karen's smile turned venomous. "Mr. Thompson, this is a closed board meeting. Residents may observe but not participate unless invited to speak." "Actually," interrupted board member Patricia Martinez, her patience clearly gone, "any resident has the right to address the board during emergency meetings. It's in our bylaws." Karen's face flushed red, but she couldn't argue with her own rules. "Fine," she snapped. "But keep it brief." I walked to the front of the room, every eye fixed on me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, humming in rhythm with the tension that filled the air. "Thank you," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'd like to begin by playing an audio clip from Friday's incident with the state housing inspector." The room fell silent as Karen's voice blasted through the speakers. "I will not calm down. This man is destroying our neighborhood. He's a troublemaker. He doesn't belong here." Then came the immigration threats, crystal clear, high-definition evidence. The crowd collectively winced as they heard their HOA treasurer threatening residents in front of a government official. "That's taken out of context," Karen shrieked, leaping to her feet. "I was defending our community?" "From what?" I asked calmly. "From me legally demanding rent for your unauthorized use of my garage?" I opened Rick's folder and began reading aloud. "Karen Whitmore has used my garage without permission on 23 documented occasions over a 6-week period. She stored personal belongings and HOA supplies on my property. Under state landlord-tenant law, this establishes an involuntary tenancy relationship." The audience hung on every word. From the back, Mrs. Chen stood again, holding her manila folder like a sword. "May I add something?" she asked sweetly. Karen's voice wavered. "This isn't the time." "Let her speak," said board member David Kim, clearly deciding that Karen had dug her grave deep enough. Mrs. Chen approached the front with the calm assurance of someone who'd addressed city councils for decades. "I have 2 years of documentation showing Karen's ongoing harassment of elderly residents, families with children, and anyone she personally decided didn't belong in this neighborhood. She opened her folder and began to read. Excessive garden gnome displays, unauthorized bird feeding stations, improper cultural decorations during holiday celebrations. The room began to stir. People whispered, pointed, recognizing their own experiences in Mrs. Chen's words. Then Carlos Rodriguez stood up. She fined us $200 because my daughter drew hopscotch squares with chalk. Bill Henderson's voice carried from the back. She made me pay $50 because my service dog's water bowl was an unapproved outdoor fixture. One by one, residents rose to their feet, each sharing their own Karen story. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood finally spoke with one voice. The floodgates had opened, and 8 years of suppressed anger and frustration came pouring out. Karen tried desperately to regain control. "This is character assassination. I've served this community faithfully for 8 years. That's when the reporter spoke up. "Mrs. Whitmore, can you comment on the false reports you filed with city and state agencies?" The room erupted. Cameras flashed, neighbors shouted questions. And Karen looked around wildly, realizing she was completely surrounded by hostile witnesses and undeniable documentation of her abuse. Board member Martinez called for order. "Given the allegations presented tonight," I said, "I motion for Karen Whitmore's immediate suspension from the HOA board pending a full investigation." "Seconded," Kim replied immediately. "All in favor?" Martinez asked. 3 hands shot up without hesitation. Karen's hand stayed conspicuously down. She stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the ruins of her suburban kingdom, looking like a dictator who had just realized the revolution had succeeded. "This isn't over," she said quietly. But her voice carried no authority anymore, only the hollow desperation of someone who had lost everything. As Karen gathered her things and walked toward the exit, Rick leaned over and whispered the perfect mic drop line. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have until midnight to pay the $350 in back rent, or we'll file eviction proceedings first thing Monday morning." The sound of her heels clicking on the linoleum floor echoed through the silent room as Pine Ridge's 8-year reign of terror finally came to an end at 11:47 p.m. that Sunday night, exactly 13 minutes before my legal deadline. I heard the familiar purr of Karen's BMW pulling into my driveway one last time. But this wasn't the entitled Karen who had first invaded my garage months ago. This was a broken woman clutching an envelope like it contained her soul. Through my security cameras, I watched her walk slowly to my door, her perfect posture finally bending under the weight of her spectacular downfall. The knock was soft, almost apologetic. When I opened the door, Karen stood there with red-rimmed eyes and an envelope trembling in her hand. "The money," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. $350 cash. I opened the envelope and counted the bills. All there, down to the last dollar. "Thank you, Karen. This settles your back rent." She nodded stiffly and turned to leave, but then stopped. For just a moment, I thought she might apologize or acknowledge the damage she'd caused. Instead, she said, "You won't be seeing me anymore. I'm moving to Florida next month." And just like that, Karen Whitmore disappeared into the night, leaving Pine Ridge forever. The aftermath was like watching a neighborhood wake up from a bad dream. Within 48 hours of Karen's resignation, the HOA board called an emergency audit of all fines collected over the past 2 years. What they found was staggering. Karen had pocketed over $4,000 in unauthorized citations, money that legally belonged to the community fund. The management company immediately refunded every bogus fine she'd issued. Mrs. Chen got back her $3,000. The Rodriguez family recovered their $200. Bill Henderson was refunded for his service dog violations. Even I got back the $150 Karen had tried to extort from me. But the real transformation was in the community itself. With Karen gone, neighbors started talking to each other again. Kids played in their yards without fear of violation notices. Mrs. Chen's garden gnomes returned to their posts like tiny sentinels celebrating victory. A new HOA board, led by Patricia Martinez, implemented what they called the Karen protocols, transparency requirements, mandatory board votes for all citations, and a community ombudsman to prevent future abuse. They even installed a suggestion box at the community center so residents could report harassment without fear of retaliation. 3 weeks after Karen's departure, something beautiful happened. I was working in my garage, finally and completely mine, when Mrs. Chen knocked on the door, holding a plate of homemade cookies that smelled like heaven. "Jake, Connie," she said, smiling. "We're organizing a block party for next Saturday. Will you help?" That block party became the first annual Pine Ridge Community Festival. 50 families showed up. Carlos brought his famous barbacoa. Bill's service dog got belly rubs from a dozen kids. Even the reporter from the local newspaper came back to write a follow-up story about neighborhood healing. But the best part? We raised enough money to build a playground where Karen's beloved aesthetic standards had once prohibited children's laughter. The kids love it, and every afternoon their happy screams echo through the neighborhood like a symphony of freedom. 6 months later, I got a call from a lawyer in Tampa. Apparently, Karen had tried her old tricks again in her new Florida community, this time targeting an elderly Cuban family with bogus violations. But her victims were ready. They'd found my story online and used my legal strategy to turn the tables on her. Involuntary tenancy, the lawyer chuckled. Brilliant move. Karen's been their tenant for 2 months and doesn't even know it yet. Some things never change. As for me, I started a small consulting business helping other communities fight HOA abuse. Turns out there are Karens everywhere and most people don't know their rights. My website, fightyourhoa.com, gets thousands of visits from desperate homeowners looking for hope. Knowledge nugget number 4. Community bullies rely on isolation and ignorance. But when neighbors unite and understand their legal rights, even the most entrenched tyrants can be defeated. Every morning, I still drink my coffee in my grandmother's kitchen, looking at her photo on the windowsill. But now I'm not failing her memory. I'm honoring it. She'd be proud to know her grandson learned to fight City Hall, or in this case, HOA hell. The garage still smells like motor oil and forgotten dreams. But now, it also carries the sweet scent of victory. Karen's BMW may be gone, but the legal precedent remains. Park in someone's garage long enough and you might just become their tenant. So what's the pettiest thing an HOA has ever done to you? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes they become case studies for my consulting work. And hey, if you enjoyed watching Karen get her comeuppance through the power of actual law, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Next week, I'll tell you about the Walmart manager who tried to make company policy disappear, a Karen who wanted to return a turkey skeleton on Black Friday. Trust me, you won't want to miss that.